sure for next meeting.
Sure.
Okay. Great. So next, I believe, yes, Christine is on. So we are lucky to have Christine King from the GAIN program. She is the director, and GAIN stands for Gateway for Innovation in Nuclear. Christine has a long history in the nuclear industry, both on the industry side, on the investment side, and R&D and advanced technologies, as now is leading GAIN's efforts to ensure the deployment of innovation into nuclear and communities. So I asked Christine if she would spend some time with us. I think many of us are familiar with GAIN, but I think some of the work they've been doing over the last year or two is really could be helpful and applicable here in Virginia. So I thought it was a good time to get an update from Christine. And I think you have some slides to share.
I do. Thank you for letting me spend part of your morning with you. I'm proud to say I started my nuclear career in Virginia 30 years ago. I spent the first 10 years of my career working for AREMA in the field, supporting outages around steam generator inspections and operability assessments, working with guys named Tiny that aren't tiny. So, but I do want to share a little bit about what we've been doing. As the nuclear technology moved closer to commercialization, kind of we at GAIN are moving with the technology, I think is the best way to describe it. Our early efforts have been focused on the developers and helping the developers use the national lab resources to further their designs. But now we're also working locally. Okay, can you see the slide?
Yes, we've got it.
Okay, perfect. So what we're doing is similar to helping developers who are new to nuclear. We're helping states and communities and local leaders understand what's going on in new nuclear and help them answer questions. All not in an effort to advocate for nuclear, but just to make sure that people have the information they need to make constructive decisions. So I'm going to dive into my field cooperate. So we kind of ended up with two phases of GAIN. Right, I'll call it inside baseball on the left-hand side here and outside baseball. And one of the challenges, I think, with the nuclear industry is over time we've developed quite the little echo chamber. So deliberately coming outside of that echo chamber and leaving our decimal points behind is an important aspect going forward as we engage in the states and localities to think about where we might build these facilities in the future. But let me talk just briefly about some of the things we're doing on the left-hand side here inside baseball. Our voucher program is very well known, and we're very proud of the progress that we've made in that space. And then most recently, we have finalized the procedures associated with sharing legacy documents. So those are the first two places I'm going to start today. So the short story on vouchers is we have awarded 79 vouchers. We've completed 56. And we've worked with 45 different companies to date. And that's all in 7.5 years with less than $30 million. I don't know that, I mean, I think $30 million over 45 companies is a minuscule amount of money in this industry. To explain a little bit about vouchers, and I want to go through this in case this is something that is makes sense as things move forward in Virginia. This might be something that's worthwhile considering. So first of all, these are not a financial award. Kind of the simplest way to describe them is you write the work scope for National Lab staff to execute, and I pay the bill. There is a 20% cost share that does not have to be cash. And the value can go up to $500,000. From the time that we close the cycle, it's open 4 times a year, but from the time that we close the cycle to award announcements is 6 weeks. So you're not waiting forever to figure out whether you got the award or not, and whether the work will be done. We have a standard CRADA that's a cooperative agreement. We do not negotiate that. That's less for your lawyers and more for mine to make sure that we can actually get to work quickly. Just to show you a little bit, if you're interested to know, as time has gone on, we are seeing more end users apply for these vouchers. Most recently, we have awarded vouchers in December to Dow Chemical prior to the announcement of the X Energy project moving to Texas. In the past, we've done some work with Eastman, and these are looking at how nuclear energy might support industrial applications. We've also awarded some vouchers around reprocessing. So this is, I think, as I said, I think this is something we're most well known for, and maybe this next item will become the second most famous thing. One of the challenges, so what is legacy documents? As many of you in the room know, the Department of Energy decades ago built and operated a number of the designs that we're considering for today. The information, the design information, the drawings, the data, the operational data is all incredibly valuable as we're designing new systems. The challenge is if that information is export controlled, you need a process to release that information to a private partner. And the other part is typically you are not identified as a private partner unless you are funded by the Department of Energy or you are co-sharing a project with a national lab. What this project does is allows us to share legacy data, export controlled or not, without having to have a funded contract with the Department of Energy. And it really creates equity across the board for folks that are developing new technologies. There's a lot more involved in this, but if you're interested in some of the legacy data from the national labs, and it does not need to be just Idaho National Labs, but all the laboratories, we'd be more than happy to help. You don't have to know the exact document you're looking for. You can call us and tell us the kind of data you're looking for, and we will go on a scavenger hunt and find it. All right, switching gears. So, as I mentioned in the beginning, as our technology moves closer to commercialization, and I think you guys are aware, just based on the activity that's going on in Virginia, there's more stakeholders who are new to nuclear that need to engage in these local and state level conversations. So we serve as kind of an honest broker in these conversations. I don't have a technology to sell. I can introduce you to what these new technologies are about, how you might think about them fitting into future energy systems. We can share what we've learned from other states and how they're approaching consideration of nuclear technologies. And so the most important thing that we're doing in this space, though, is I don't have a templated, and maybe the next slide gets a little bit more into the detail to share with you. So let me, before I get to that next slide, let me explain a little bit of what you see on the slide. On the left-hand side is, the left corner is just showing you the states that we have been involved in, following legislation, talking with local leaders. We are, and it's kind of twofold. Sometimes it's economic development teams, and sometimes it's legislators and energy committees. Sometimes for example, in Colorado, it's the local counties themselves that have coal stations they're concerned about. On the right-hand side, to help specifically in states where they're considering either new legislation or looking at legislation that's on the books, we have compiled a summary of nuclear-related legislation. That's the bottom right box. And categorize that such that with this interactive map, you can not only look at, for example, if you were interested in zero emission credits and other financial provisions, you can look at if you have that legislation in your state, but you can also look at the legislation that's available or on the books in other states. So this is helpful for states that maybe have recently lifted a moratorium and now they're looking at any other legislation that may either need to be strengthened or simplified as they think about permitting the project going forward. The upper box is our summary of what happened in the 2022 legislative sessions. Whether it passed or not, we tried to track all the bills that were going through the state level, processes last year. Rough guess is that website for 2023 would have at least double the amount that we had on it last year. So we're in the process. And on this particular website, we are working hard to just give you, again, kind of categorizing those bills, allowing for you to sort, to look for similar bills across states, and giving you a quick description of what was in that bill. There's no analysis here, it's just information that can be used. So to give you an idea, when I talk about local engagement, what does that mean? Well, first of all, local engagement doesn't happen without having the right partners. So GAIN is not going into communities where we're not invited. I don't have a map over here in my house trying to check off every state in the nation, although that could be fun, but that's not our objective. We work ahead of time trying to understand not only who the local or regional leaders might be, but also understand the drivers for the consideration of nuclear technology in those areas. And what I mean by that is for some states that have decarbonization goals, they're clearly trying to understand potentially how nuclear and renewables might be good partners. In other cases, as I mentioned before, when you're dealing with fossil fuel dependent states, this is about economic preservation and transformation of their economy. And there, the pressure may be coming from neighboring states that do have aggressive decarbonization goals and are demanding clean energy. Fossil fuel dependent states primarily are energy exporters and industrial centers. So they're also getting pressure from their industrial customers to deliver clean energy. And it's very important in every state and with each group that you're working with to be mindful of those drivers. And that's why you won't see us delivering the same information. We build the information custom. Think of us kind of like consultants in that space. My team is very service oriented in terms of having a meeting with our stakeholder and listening to their needs and then bringing back to them something that's specific for them. One of the first webinar series you see on the upper right here was actually with the state of Kentucky. So we partnered with the Kentucky Office of Energy Policy, and the state at that time was not ready to talk about nuclear. They weren't really ready to talk about transitioning away from coal. But they did need to talk about future energy planning and what a new energy future might look like. So we talked about energy planning in the context of all of the above. And through that, we introduced how advanced nuclear may play into an all of the above scenario. I'm very pleased in kind of the response that we had. This was a webinar series with utilities across the state of Kentucky. And then we also ended with a workshop there. So Kentucky has moved from this start to they just in this legislative session established a working group on advanced nuclear that owes recommendations to the governor by the end of the year. So and that was in the span of less than 18 months. So we have the ability to help people develop a common language quickly to support the speed at which these conversations are going. After this meeting today, I guess this is just my day to be in Virginia, at least virtually. I have been working with the Southern Environmental Law Center. We were invited because of the conversations that are going on in Virginia and Tennessee and North Carolina and Georgia, really throughout the Southeast. The energy partners, or the partners in the energy practice at the Southern Environmental Law Center, we're interested in understanding new nuclear, the regulation, the regulatory process, public engagement. So we've been working with them for three Fridays. For fun, we call these Vision Fridays. And today is our last Vision Friday. We'll just be talking a little bit more. Questions have evolved over time in these conversations. And today's discussion is kind of how does this look at a utility commission level when they're considering new technologies and how that might be priced. The last thing I'll mention is I work directly with the front office of the Office of Nuclear Energy, where they have specific support with NASIO and NARUC and Governors Association and NCSL. So I'll answer any other questions you might have in this particular space at the end, but I just wanted you to give a flavor of the types of things that we do. I always announce myself as a 30-year nuclear veteran, not here to advocate for the technology, but just to answer questions. Switching gears a little bit, and I guess kind of feeding off of the previous presenter, we have been doing work specifically in the coal to nuclear space, really focused on these energy community transitions. I'm going to come back to our case studies on the left-hand side. One of the most valuable things that we've done, though, is on a monthly basis, we bring together the researchers that are working on this on the nuclear side of the equation. The reason we are meeting on a monthly basis is we are dedicated to each other to not duplicate our work in this space. There is a small window of opportunity for these communities, and the faster we can get to either no or yes in terms of whether this type of transition makes sense for them is important. And so the groups that you see here, we get together once a month. One of us presents where we are with our particular research. We get lots of hard questions. But at the core of us, we're trying to make sure that we're not duplicating efforts, and that each of us is digging deeper into this and adding to the information we need to make these projects viable. On the case study side of things, the chart here is from the interagency working group on coal where they identified the priority regions for coal retirements and the impact that it might have to different communities. So I have only been on the national lab side of the equation for, just 1 second. I have a ray of sunshine coming straight into my eyeball there. I've only been on the national lab side of things for 3 years, so I really come at a lot of the work that we do being with a commercial background. My objective in doing pilot studies specific to coal stations is really in recognition that at some point, somewhere, somebody's in a boardroom trying to defend this project, get approval, and get it financed. So there's 2 things that drove us in choosing our pilot stations. One, we needed a partner utility. So not doing another study where you weren't directly engaging with the utility. Now, wanting utilities that did not have nuclear in their portfolio, the idea being that it would be a higher hurdle for them in many different ways considering nuclear technology. And then we were also looking at whether it's the ownership or looking for unique features of the business case such that as we do our pilot projects, hopefully what happens is with a handful or so of these, other stations might recognize aspects of themselves and in those projects, in those models, and be able to come up to speed a little bit faster. Let me tell you a little bit about Coronado Generating Station. It's owned by Salt River Project. It's in St. John's, Arizona, 4 hours east of Phoenix. It is a 2-unit station. They have done a significant amount of upgrades on their environmental controls in the past years, and they are moving towards seasonal operation with retirement dates in the early 2030s. The benefit here is it's wholly owned by Salt River Project, so we're only working with one utility. The interesting thing, though, is that there are 6 other coal units within commuting distance of this station. It also sits in Apache County, which crosses into Navajo Nation. So we've been engaging with Navajo Nation. The mayor's office of St. John's is involved. Mayor Spence also works at the plant. So sometimes I have to ask him which hat he has on when we're talking. We're doing 3 specific things for Coronado Generating Station. We're doing what I would call probably the first 40% of the siting evaluation, using every siting guide, looking at exclusionary and avoidance factors. So if they wanted to site a new nuclear plant here or a large light water reactor, helping them understand if there's factors, exclusionary factors that prevent you from siting, think seismic activity that can't be changed, or not enough water, those types of things, or avoidance factors. Now I realize looking at the picture, you're going to say there's no slope there, but I'm going to use slope as an example. Potentially in areas where your slope is too severe, you can, through engineering, you can change that if you wanted to. So that's the difference between exclusionary and avoidance. The second thing that we're doing is really in service to the community, is helping them understand if you were to transition from coal station to nuclear station, how does the community change? What does that look like? That's in terms of number of jobs. It's also for the utility, we look at the transition of the workforce itself. And the last piece is Everett has recently published a nuclear technology assessment guide, and it really gives the framework. It doesn't tell you the answers, but it tells you all the questions, gives you a framework to walk through making that decision. What I like about this guide is it starts with what are your business objectives, and you balance the technology against that. We won't complete everything that this guide asked for, but we will be identifying for Salt River project some technologies to watch, not specific designs or brand names, so to speak, but the types of technologies that fit their business objectives. And one other unique feature about the assessment guide is it gives you a way to think about where these technologies are in terms of maturity and level of effort to completion and deployment. So given where we are as an industry in the decade of demonstration with these new technologies, I think this is a place where I hear many people struggle. How do I think about when these technologies will be ready? The second station we have is the jet station. This is in Kentucky in Carroll County. It's right on the Ohio River. Interesting, as you drive to this station, there are 3 steel manufacturing mills nearby and a gypsum plant making drywall. What we're doing for them is similar to some of the activities that we are doing for Coronado. We're doing more detailed evaluation on the siting, but kind of the unique feature of this particular one is looking at how they support their industrial customers. So could you envision either delivering the same inputs they receive today, or if you're delivering process heat and speed, or do you need to go through a synthetic fuel to support those industrial customers? So we'll be engaging with the industrial customers as part of this project. Both of these projects, the Jane Station is expected to complete in September. We are on the last piece of our analysis for Coronado, and that's our economic assessment. So we would expect the Coronado pilot study to be out this summer. The last report I want to point you to is the Loan Programs Office published a liftoff report. They did this for 3 different technologies, but they specifically focused on advanced nuclear as well. Again, I think this is a useful report in understanding what full-scale industrialization will look like. And this is based on adding 200 to 300 gigawatts of advanced nuclear. They go through and look at all the different models and why they chose that particular number. And if you'd like an introduction to the researcher that did this work, be more than happy to make that. Julie's really a great person to talk to. That is all, well, this is actually one of my favorite charts coming out of that particular report. Looking at how we might think about the features of our energy in the future and how they measure against one another. And they were just in one chart trying to capture how all of those technologies compare on these different features. And that truly was my last slide.
Great, thank you, Christine.
I have 2 questions that are not necessarily related. Scott Koppel, BWXT. Thank you so much, Christine, for your presentation. I'm curious, and I'm asking this question, sort of thinking about deployment, which I appreciate using that word just about on every slide, but also manufacturability. And I'm curious if you have an example or 2 where a GAIN voucher has at least gotten a step closer, several steps closer, because I understand what GAIN is and what it's intended for. And if you can't mention developer or company or organization name, that's fine if it's proprietary for whatever reason. But I am curious if you could give us an example or two that where you saw the direct benefit of getting one step closer to deployment, or perhaps even being utilized today with maybe X Energy or TerraPower, since with their ARDP, big demo programs.
Yeah, so I think initially, I'm gonna share this just because I think it might be interesting. Hang on, I thought I was gonna share it. Come back. I did put a backup slide in, as all good nuclear people do. So, just to give you an idea, this is, you can see over time, we have had, primarily this was developers, we've now seen suppliers start to step in and use the voucher program, specifically either tackling, doing some modeling associated with being able to deploy that component. A lot of this has been with the molten salt area. You'll see up here with molten salt reactors being one of the largest beneficiaries of the voucher program. And I don't think that's because of the nuclear aspects of molten salt reactors. I think it's really associated with the challenges of pumping and the corrosive nature of molten salts. But you also see utilities and energy users that are coming in. And so when I think about deployment from a utility perspective, we have some of them coming in. GBA in particular is doing a study to look at where they might site new nuclear within their service territory. We also have utilities, or non-utilities. This is kind of an interesting group that's emerging. I'll call them nuclear land developers. So they're not, they don't plan to build and operate a nuclear plant, but they are working ahead of the industry to identify viable sites and potentially looking at repurposing. I don't know if they intend to get into remediation, but there's kind of like a new support system in the supply chain that's emerging around that. This gives you an idea of where the vouchers have focused in the past. And again, I think just because of the nature of where we've been, you see this a lot where you might imagine around reactor core design. But what I'll point out is on the top of this right-hand chart, we're starting to see more operability things come into space, right? Where people are looking at transport canisters and cables and shielding and pumps. So to me, those are all positive indications of where the technology is moving. We have two companies that have recently come in the reprocessing space and looking at technologies there. I'll point out one thing. So on our website, you can see an abstract of all of the vouchers, and when it's completed, we do publish a one-page summary. The results of the vouchers are protected to the companies for 5 years for business purposes. Some of them have chosen to publish papers publicly, and where we know those are out there, we can share those. But I think there's a lot of good examples about how the program is moving and helping folks think about scale and deployment.
I'll hold my second question.
Other questions? Christine, I had one on the cold and nuclear work that you're doing. it's kind of two parts. One is, did each of those generating stations come to you all to partner on those pilots? How did you identify those? I mean, you talked about the characteristics that made them attractive, but did they invite you in? I guess that's the first part of my question.
Yes, they invited, well, okay, so St. John's, the community, invited me in, and then I had to convince Salt River Project that we should do a project together in St. John's. So it was actually the economic development team seeing the retirement looming in their future and doing some of their own research. They felt like nuclear might be an option, but you know, they didn't have the skill sets to evaluate that. So they reached out to the interagency working group on coal communities, and they got referred down to GAIN to learn more about nuclear technology. And then I approached Salt River Project about doing the research project together. It took us about 4 months to get through the utility all the way to the board for approval of the project.
And then
The webinar series I did in Kentucky resulted in that utility coming forward and asking if we could think about doing a pilot project in Kentucky. And we looked at a variety of, I think we looked at 2 or 3 of their stations before they settled on the Gen station in particular. I've been working in northwestern Colorado with the Craig and Hayden stations. Next week I'll be talking with the Pueblo station there. We've engaged in Montana with Colstrip. So it comes from a variety of different places. The work in Montana and Colorado came from the senators. Senator Rankin in particular in Colorado, Craig and Hayden are in his district, and he was trying to figure out how to save the jobs.
How are those studies, or the pilot studies, how are they funded? Is that a joint funding between the station and you, or is it all GAIN?
I pay for that out of my research budget,
okay.
And I don't know how many pilot studies we will end up doing in this space, but that's what I think about the way GAIN was created. We were created to be flexible and nimble to be able to do these types of pilot studies. The only request I have, so as you might imagine, there's some things, I'll talk specifically about the Salt River Project again. We're working with the integrated resource planning team. And so some of what is in our documents to them are probably business sensitive information. All my ask is that they allow us to publish a public version of the information. And I also ask them to be a peer champion to other coal communities or utilities thinking about the same transition. So that's kind of what I get back on my investment of time and dollars for the station.
Right. Scott, did you have another?
Unless someone else does first.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Christine, Scott again. Tom picked up on where I was sort of going with my next question was regarding the coal to nuclear, the feasibility studies that that GAIN is engaged in. I'm curious if those have included, and maybe they do, maybe they don't, anything on the economic side in terms of informing the actual business case for the communities and the operators that are there now. And maybe not.
Do you mean the cost, the reactor cost?
Well, all those, the cost of doing business. You know, if I'm going to build a reactor, replace in this case, in terms of what kind of energy generation I'm going to have, you know, on the grid. I'm just curious if that piece is something you all are doing, or if it's not. Because that's just another factor that we need to always be thinking about if we're gonna, when it comes to deployment.
Yeah, so I'm going to attempt to answer that. This may not satisfy you, so
Fair enough.
come back at me.
No worries.
If I don't hit it right. So from an economics perspective, we start with the business objectives. And I think sometimes digging in here and looking further out in terms of not only what they want to do with that station, but potentially what's going on at a state or regional level. In Arizona, in the Appalachians, a lot of folks are thinking about how to support hydrogen hubs, right? So the economics in the beginning become, are you going to use this facility for more than electricity generation? So that's where it starts. And in some cases, they're like mandatory for electricity generation, and we understand how much demand is increasing over the next couple of decades. They're looking at other retiring sources in Arizona, like they're following the license, the existing license for Palo Verde, and when that might come offline. Supporting hydrogen hubs, locally also thinking about how the technology might enable other industries. Like, what else could I attract? So that's when you start to get in not only to the manufacture of hydrogen, but also potentially thinking about advanced manufacturing or other, so it starts to get into the supply chain. And so when we're working with economic development teams, it's really looking at maybe more of a strategic map or roadmap and how you might think about, now that I have this technology, what else could I do with it? One of the biggest holes we have in this space is, and the hardest question to answer right now, is how much will a reactor cost? And there's research to point to in terms of, what we expect in terms of the learning curve and the research that has pointed to what price point do we need to achieve on, LCOE. We are currently on the game team trying to figure out how to get some anonymized cost data with some uncertainty bands out that can be useful in this space, primarily, and thinking about, especially if you think about integrated resource planners, what is the performance in terms of dispatchability and flexibility, but having the cost and the time associated with when we might achieve that cost. So that's how we're looking at the economics. The economics on a county basis is really understanding how many jobs you'll have at the station itself, how many jobs does that induce in the community, and what you might expect from a tax basis associated with having that technology in the community.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, well, Christine, I have one last one. Just can we share your slides? Because those are great.
Absolutely, I will send them to you. I want to finish with one announcement. We're pretty excited. We're partnering with the Nuclear Energy Institute and EPRI. In the fall, we will be hosting a meeting specifically dedicated to coal to nuclear. I'm sure you guys are aware that there's many panels out there in nuclear meetings talking about coal to nuclear, but the devil really is in the details for these projects. These communities have small windows of opportunity. When we set the dates, it will probably be in the late mid-October or early November timeframe. It's going to be close to you, I think. I have not secured my location, but it's probably going to be in a neighboring state with a shared thing. Okay, I think you guys got that. Okay. So, but yeah, we're excited to it's not easy to pull off a conference like this in less than 6 months' notice, but we think it's important and helpful. Just one thing, I would love to know more about the meeting, the rec group as well. April, maybe that's something you and I could follow up on. It'd be nice.
It's already on my list.
Okay, great. Anyway, thank you so much. I hope you guys have a great rest of your meeting, and ask for what you need from GAIN. We're here to help. Like I said, I don't have a standard set of products that I'm selling. We will go to work and customize things that are useful to what you guys are trying to achieve.
Thank you, Christine. Really appreciate it. And yeah, we'll share the slides, and any follow-up, we'll point them directly to you. But thank you very much. Appreciate it.
All right, thank you.